Hello everyone. Today we will get acquainted with the case mystery, which requires very strong nerves, and which will be evaluated very ambiguously. The conclusions are yours to draw, but let's get right to the point. Lacy Allen Fletcher was born on November 25, 1985. Her parents were Clay and Sheila Fletcher. The girl was the only child in a family living in a small town in the state of Louisiana. This town had no more than 1,000 residents. Its name translates to slaughter, which is very fitting for the theme of today's story. When the girl was about 9 years old, she moved with her parents to live in a new house located in a nice residential neighborhood on Slater Street. This street ended in a cul-de-sac with large houses and nice front gardens. From the outside, it seems like a much prettier world there, and life must be happier than elsewhere. The Fletcher family looked like a typical middle-income family. Lacy's mother, Sheila, worked as a clerk at the courthouse. She was responsible for all administrative procedures at the court, in Baker, and her father worked for a non-profit organization. The family was devout and attended church every Sunday. Lacy attended Baptist Academy and played on the volleyball team there. Neighbors said that Lacy was no different from regular kids, was fun, active, and loved to interact with other kids. She looked like a petite, well-built girl, liked to play sports in the garden or run in the street. However, when she was 14 years old, her parents took her out of school and she was homeschooled from then on. Lacy had by then begun to show signs of Asperger's syndrome, albeit unnoticeable to the uninitiated. Asperger's syndrome is an autistic disorder that is most often accompanied by impaired empathy, lack of social competence, and often unusual interests. The affected person's intellectual development is almost the same as that of a healthy person, so it's not entirely clear why Lacy was pulled out of school and homeschooled. The parents have not made any specific statements about this publicly. Perhaps it had something to do with Asperger's syndrome and social disorders, but neither neighbors nor children noticed anything unusual in Lacy's behavior. Lacy's friend and classmate later said that they became instant friends when Lacy was in school and described the girl as a very close and dear person. She mentioned that Lacy was often reserved and shy, but at the same time could clearly express her opinion on an occasion. After Lacy stopped going to school at the age of 14, the connection between the friends broke down, and her classmate hardly ever heard from Lacy again. One time, though she can't remember from whom, the friend heard that Lacy had seen a psychologist regularly as a teenager, which was a bit unusual at the time, and most visits to a psychologist were for serious reasons. A neighbor of the Fletcher family named Robert in 2022 said he had seen Lacy about 15 years ago, which is when she was just over 20. At that time, the grown-up girl would sometimes hang out with his younger brother since their houses were in the neighborhood, and even then Robert noticed that she wasn't like people her age. She just had different interests. While other girls went to parties, drank alcohol, or were interested in guys, Lacy preferred to watch Disney movies alone. Anyway, after the age of 14, the girl grew up and seemed more and more withdrawn. She went out less and less, didn't go to school, and had almost no friends. After Lacy actually stopped communicating with this neighbor Robert's brother, and she was nowhere to be seen, everyone assumed that most likely either the family had moved somewhere else or Lacy had been sent elsewhere to study. But that wasn't the case, and if someone had known that Lacy had been living in her parents' home all these years, it would have been possible to save her. In May 2017, Robert met with Lacy's father and decided to inquire about the fate of the girl, wanting to know how she was doing, moved to where and how her life was going, where she was studying, what she was studying. But Lacy's father answered that everything was fine and she still lived at home, and then quickly changed the topic of conversation. All this already seemed strange to the neighbor because at that time the girl must have been a little over 30, and living in the neighborhood, even if not getting into other people's lives, you still have the opportunity to see how those who live nearby, taking out the garbage, coming or going somewhere. However, no one has seen Lacy in all the years, and then there's that strange withdrawal of his father from the conversation, and the neighbor's suspicions have stayed with him. January 2022, at 2:30 a.m., the local police station received a call. It was Lacy's mother, Sheila Fletcher. Her voice was distraught and she reported that her daughter had stopped breathing. Police and an ambulance immediately went to the home, at the same time notifying the city coroner. When authorities entered the home, they smelled a disgusting odor. It was the smell of rot and feces, and it was simply unbearable to breathe the air in the house. The coroner would later say that in his entire professional career, he had never smelled anything worse than that odor, and he was unable to eat properly for a week because of nausea. The man also had a nervous breakdown, even though he had worked as a doctor and coroner for 30 years. He had seen all kinds of accidents and incidents over the years, but what came before his eyes at the Fletcher home shocked and horrified him. The sheriff of police was also utterly bewildered at the picture he saw. In the house, in the spacious living room, was a couch on which Lacy was lying. From a glance at her face, one could tell that she was somewhere around 36 years old, but she had a scruffy appearance, just at first glance. A closer inspection revealed that Lacy weighed 43 pounds. She was severely emaciated. The only clothing she was wearing was a t-shirt, and that was pulled up over her chest. Her eyes were wide open, and her hair was completely tangled, like a tightly woven mat that had somehow ended up on her head, and it was impossible to comb it. Her entire body was stained with feces. Even in her ears, nostrils, and mouth were found waste products. There were bed sores everywhere on her body, which were festering, and some were so deep that they reached the bones. Bed sores are mostly found on those who are bedridden due to illness. Lacy had brown spots and sores all over her body. Her buttocks were completely deformed and skin was missing in places. Lacy was infested with maggots and insects that had eaten into her body parts, causing immense suffering. Photos taken at that time never made it to the media, internet, or anywhere else, as they were just horrific and could have been traumatizing to people. Even the coroner and the police officers on duty who arrived on the call took a long time to come to their senses at what they saw. However, there are photos in the public domain of the couch where Lacy died. This piece of furniture was completely destroyed. It was rotten. And where Lacy lay with her buttocks, a huge hole was formed, in which human remains, shreds of skin, pus, and feces were found. Even the wooden floor beneath the couch was covered in it all and had begun to rot. When the coroner opened the body, he found remnants of foam from the upholstery of the couch in the girl's stomach. Apparently, she was so hungry that she started eating the couch. Lacy's cause of death is investigative, which means that the death was not due to a single cause, but a combination of many factors. These included bed sores that needed to be treated immediately, as well as bone inflammation and blood poisoning. When Lacy was found, her mother Sheila was sitting with her on the couch crying. Father Clay looked completely emotionless. The investigator naturally had many questions. How could it have happened that the man was in such a state? When did he become neglected? Why had the parents who lived in the house with Lacy done nothing? And why did they allow things to go so far? Initially, the girl's parents did not want to comment publicly. Later, the mother testified that Lacy grew farther and farther away from them. And when she was in her early 20s, at some point she didn't want to leave the house at all. She had no interests. At some point, Lacy refused to get up off the couch, at which point her parents went to the doctor. But it was a doctor they went to for counseling without Lacy, since she refused to leave the house. This doctor advised to take the girl to the hospital. But Lacy didn't want to go anywhere, and the parents didn't seem to know how they should proceed. Her condition was getting worse. And at one point, Lacy wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom. She began to go to the bathroom on a towel her mother had placed by the couch. And sometimes it just happened in bed. The girl lay silently and aloofly on the ruined linen. The mother went on to say that she was constantly bringing her daughter food, as well as giving her drinks and trying to tend to her wounds, which came from the girl lying on the couch all the time. Lacy never complained of pain and was lucid until the very end. When Lacy suddenly stopped breathing, her mother called emergency services. But it was too late. Rumors have emerged that the parents were forced to make the call by a neighbor who saw Lacy lying on the couch through the window and realized that something was wrong. And he told the girl's mom, "Take your pick," and if she didn't report it to the police, he would do it himself. But subsequently, the police would not confirm this information. But, as you know, rumors don't come from nothing. They are generated by a lack of information. Later it became known that the parents of the girl before her death was not at home at all for almost 2 days. And during these days their daughter remained hungry. Of course, maybe the mother put some food on the sofa, but still no one took care of her during those days. This begs the question, why didn't Lacy get up from the couch and get something to eat herself, since she was in her right mind? Some sources suggest that the girl suffered from locked-in syndrome, in which a person is fully conscious, but physically almost completely paralyzed. And it is caused by brain damage, among other things. In total, Lacy lived exclusively on that couch for over 12 years without getting up. In court, the jury members needed medical assistance to somehow make sense of the photos of Lacy's body. When these photos were shown, there was complete silence in the courtroom. Everyone present was just in shock and couldn't believe what they were seeing. On May 2, 2022, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were charged with second-degree murder and were initially sent to the East Feliciana jail. The parents repeatedly maintained that they were not at fault and emphasized that their daughter Lacy was sane to the end and could make her own decisions. On May 4, the Fletchers were released on $300,000 bail, and the trial didn't end there. They will be tried in February 2023. But how is it inconceivable that the parents left their daughter to decompose alive on the couch without doing anything or taking action? They even watched TV in the evenings in the same room. That is, the couch Lacy was lying on was in the family's living room, and the parents watched movies in the evenings while their daughter lay nearby in that state. This is unthinkable to imagine, as the smell of feces and putrefaction throughout the house was simply unbearable. And my parents were still living there, living a normal life. Lacy lived an abnormal life, and her parents continued to act as if nothing had happened. There are other very scary details that have never been made public. And people familiar with the story still wonder how this could have happened, and whether it was an insidious process that lasted 12 years where Lacy is left lying on the couch one day and her condition slowly deteriorates more and more. Certainly her bed sores did not appear yesterday or today, but over the course of a long period of time. And one more point. Suppose someone's child declares that he will no longer go to the bathroom, to the toilet. How do you let that go and brush it off? And even if Lacy was an adult, there was still a way to put her in an institution at the very least where she could be helped, albeit involuntarily. Of course, that requires a considerable financial investment, and it's not believable that Lacy's parents didn't have the funds for such medical care. They had a full-time job that they made a good living at. There was a big house in a nice residential neighborhood, and they didn't seem to be up to their eyeballs in debt, as they quickly put up $300,000 in their mortgage. It's hard to believe that the parents couldn't find the funds for psychological help for their daughter. It appears that the girl was receiving treatment in her early teens. But why and at what point it all stopped, no one will be able to say what was going on in the minds of Lacy's parents or herself. But the fact is that a healthy person would not voluntarily spend her life on the couch. That's partly clear. Something must have happened in the girl's head, and her parents must have found it difficult or impossible to get through to her. Or maybe they just didn't want to deal with her. Lacy's parents charged her with manslaughter, but the charge was eventually changed to second-degree murder. The verdict, unfortunately, is still pending. And because of that, it is very tragic that the girl's parents just continue to live their normal lives without recognizing or feeling guilty about anything. Thank you for watching. I recommend checking out other true crime stories as well. Click right now and also subscribe to my channel. See you soon.